Test, which is about inyanim of Teffilah. And if you remember in Sif Bayis, the Gra had a very interesting explanation in the famous statement of the Gemara, just looking at the very last thing at the end of Sif Bayis, Shelo yehei davar chotzetz beino lebein hakir. That there's a halacha of Tefillah that there should not be any division, any blockage between you and the wall. So ideally, I should be davening facing a wall, and there shouldn't be a bench or a chair or a person walking in front of me. There shouldn't be a chatzitza, beino lebein hakir. And the Gemara derives that halacha from Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Remember, Chizkiyahu HaMelech was a very righteous king, but he was very ill, and he was on the verge of death. And the Gemara explains because he didn't want to get married because he saw with Ruach HaKodesh that he would have a Rasha, which indeed he did. His son was Menashe, a very evil Rasha. And Yeshayahu HaNavi told him, it's none of your business to make cheshbonos about the future. You are mechuyev to do your mitzvah, and because of this, he was chayev misa. And in the book of Sefer Malachim, it says that he turned his face to the wall and he prayed to Hashem. So the Gemara darshans, Shelo yehei davar chotzetz beinai lebein hakir. Right, so that's a halacha literally. But the Gra interprets it, there's also a remez that kir refers to kiros halev. Kiros halev are the walls of your heart. Your feelings, your emotions are called kiros halev. So there shouldn't be any separation between you, that means your dibor, your mouth, and your heart. Meaning what you say with your mouth should be what you feel in your heart. It's a very, very amazing thing. And that is the inyan of kavana. And then he says, Kabbalistically, which is a bit tricky, that when the mouth, again, this is called in Chazal generally, piv v'libay shavin. Your mouth and your heart are equal. They're the same. They're going in the same direction. Now he then says, that is the meaning, I'm reviewing a little bit, of the Kabbalistic formula, Yichud Kudsha Berichu Ushechintei. That when I do a mitzvah, according to the Mekubalim, I'm doing it to unite HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his Shekhinah. Now, I think I mentioned last week that the Night of Yehuda was absolutely against the average person saying L'Shem Yichud, because if I'm not a Mekubal and I really don't understand what's going on, then it looks like there are two things. There's something called Kudsha B'Richu, and there's something called the Shekhinah, and I'm talking about bringing them together. That's what the words say, Liyichud, Kudsha B'Richu, Shechintei. But obviously, that would be apikorsis, that would be kafira, that would be avodah zarah, to believe there are two things here. So, what we say is, kavyachol, it's a mashal, but you see, that doesn't really answer it, because what does the mashal mean? I mean, we're talking about unification as a mashal, but a mashal for what? See, that's the big problem. But be it as it may, the way it works structurally is that the Kudsha B'Richu are the six spheres of Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. The Shekhinah is Malchus, that's the feminine aspect of God. And when Malchus comes together with the six spheres, that gives it's like a Zohar and a Nekeva, life is created. So Kabbalah is using the imagery of Zohar and Nekeva to refer to how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashpia in the world. Miyached, the six spheres, which are called Kudsha B'Richu, with Malchus, which is called Shekhinah, and Malchus is called Nukva, the feminine element, and that creates Shefa and Bracha. So when a person says L'Shem Yichud Kudsha B'Richu, what he's saying in simple Balabatisha language is, I'm doing mitzvahs so Hashem will bring bracha into the world. I mean, that's the non-Kabbalistic thing, but you're using it through the idea of Yichud Kutcher Brichu Shechintei. So now the Gra goes further with the analogy, and he says that the 6 Sfiros are called the Lev of Hashem. The heart, the emotions, Chesed, Gevurah, these are emotions. Malchus, which is the feminine, receiving all of this, is the mouth. Just like the opening of the woman would be called a peh. Memela, the Gra says, that when you have no separation between your mouth and your lev, then you, in microcosm, are gorem, the macrocosm of yichud kutcher berichu ushechintei. Very, very, again, I mean, I know that we really don't know what any of this means, but I think we can taste a little bit how powerful the idea is that my lowly actions on earth create a parallel process within the Ribbono Shel Olam that affects the entire universe. That's one of the important ideas. See, mitzvos are not just about, this is what the Nefesh HaChaim talks about. Of course, Rav Chaim Volozhiner was the Talmud of the Gra. Mitzvahs are not just about my private accounting. A person might have the attitude of mitzvahs, oh, I better do mitzvahs because when I do good things, God rewards me. I have a better bank account. When I do bad things, I lose my bank account. And it's simply a one-to-one thing. Hashem looks at me, my mitzvahs, my averos. But the Mekubalim taught, and this is what Nefesh HaChaim talks about, and it appears in the Even Shelaima many, many times in different ways, that you have to understand the cosmic dimension of mitzvahs. That mitzvahs create kedusha through the whole universe. And chas v'sholom averos creates chorban throughout the whole universe. It's like those pinball games or computer games, right? You push a certain button and 10 million, whatever it is, widgets get wiped off. Whatever that's what kind of happens, I didn't read Shema this morning. I destroyed 10 trillion worlds of ruchnius. You don't realize. You do a mitzvah, what you've created. You do an avera, what you've destroyed. So he says, quite literally, by Teffilah, when it's piv v'li by shavim, you have yichud kutcher berichu ushechintei. Okay, that's the power of Teffilah. Okay. The next is Gimel. Yeah, actually, I think we read Gimel too. Gimel is very short. Kaidam Teffilah tzarech lachshav aleha kedei shedei shagura b'piv. Before we daven, we should think about the words we're going to say in order that the words should be fluent in my mouth. Now, again, I think now that I remember, I think I did leave you with a little bit of a question, which I'm not sure I have a teretz for. The basis of this teaching is actually a Gemara about Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa. Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa was a Tana, and he is meforsam primarily because he was a Baal Maifes. He was a person who was on such a high madrega, he could do miracles. He was basically a miracle worker. Even though al pi halacha, we don't have that many halachas from him. But obviously he was one of the greatest of the tzaddikim because he had a koyach to do nisim. If you remember, this is the famous story that that he lived in abject poverty. He lived in great aniyas. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Kala Eilam Kulai, the whole world gets parnasa only in the zechus of Chanina ben Daisa. But Chanina b'ni, Chanina my son, all he needs is a kav, a small measure of charuvim, carobs. Me'erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos. In other words, his kayach brought parnasa to the whole world. So he could have asked for $1 million or whatever it would be. Right? I mean, because he brings everything down. But he wanted nothing. He wanted nothing. And it mentions that his wife was they were so poor, they didn't have oil to light for Ner Shabbos. So she said, what am I supposed to do? So he said, take vinegar and light. But she said, vinegar doesn't ignite. So he said, the same God who says shemen can light can also say vinegar can light. See, Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa came to a certain hasaga that there really is no such thing as teva. Everything is a nes. The fact that oil burns is not because it naturally burns. It burns because it's the Ratzon Hashem that oil should burn. So teva is also a nes, except it's a nes that happens a lot. It's not like there's something called nature. There is only nisim. But some nisim happen all the time, so we take them for granted. Some nisim happen only rarely, so we call that a nes. But in terms of, it doesn't happen by itself. It only happens because the Eibishter is so geyser. It's the same for oil, same for vinegar. And when he reached that madrega, he was zeicher to nisim, because he saw that everything was a nes. Everything was a nes. Now the emes is, we say in Davenings, every day in Shemona Esrei, 3 times a day. Al nisecha shebechol yomimanu. We thank Hashem for the miracles that are with us every single day. So people say, what's the miracle? What's the miracle? I didn't see any miracle. Yeah, the miracle is you walk, you breathe, you can see, you can hear. That's a miracle. It's not that I can see only because I was born with vision. I see only because Hashem this very second is giving me the kayach hariyah. There's no such thing as inertia. You don't have anything because you had it. You have it only because it's being given to you right now. Hashem is making a decision that right now you deserve to see. See, it's very different, very, very different. Not that, I was given something and I just have it because the teva is, it stays with me unless, God forbid, there's an accident or something. No, every time. So this is the emes is, this is one of the terutzim, it's not Iranian right now, to the most famous kasha about Chanukah, right? Everybody asked the kasha about Chanukah if they found enough oil to burn for one night, and the nes happened that it burned for 8 days. So the miracle of Chanukah is only 7 days, not 8 days. Right? The first day is not a miracle. There was enough oil for 1 day. This is a kasha that is said in the name of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef has the kasha. And there are so many terutzim. And they keep on doing more and more and more and more. I saw a kuntris that had 250 answers, terutzim, to this kasha, gematria ner. But then somebody came out with 500 terutzim, and I believe the last one that I'm aware of is somebody did 1,000 terutzim to this kasha. Now the emes is, I can't say that I ever read even the whole 250, but you can see right away that they're kind of cheating, meaning, let's say, Teretz 130 is almost the same as Teretz 79. They changed a little thing. I really wouldn't count it as separate. I mean, there are separate terutzim, but in terms of all of these huge numbers, at that point you're kind of just changing around a little knei here, and it's not really a din of a second teretz. But one of the most beautiful terutzim is from the Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer says, mamish, based on this Gemara about Chaimitz, that by virtue of the miracle of the 7 extra days, we came to a hakora that even the first day is a miracle. And what's your kasha? Why make a Yom Tov the first day? It wasn't a miracle. There was enough oil to burn for a day. Answer, the fact that oil burns at all is a miracle. Yeah, it's a miracle too. It's a miracle. That's the normal way things work, but it's a miracle. So the Chassam Sofer has a gewaldige pshat that this is the meaning of ma'os sor. So excuse me for digressing a little bit. In the zemer ma'os sor that we sing after the Chanukah candles. So each stanza is about a different galus. A stanza about Mitzrayim, and then about Bavel, and then about Paras, and then Yavan. There's only one stanza about Chanukah. Yavanim nikbetzu alai. So Ma'oz Sor is not a song about Chanukah. Ma'oz Sor is a song about all of the galus, and there's one stanza about Chanukah, Yavanim nikbetzu alai. So it says at the end, the last of that stanza is, B'nai binah, the people of binah, the people of understanding, Yemei Shemaina kavu shir urinanim. They made Chanukah for 8 days, a time of song. So the Chasam Sofer as I made, why are the Masakne Takana of Ner Chanukah, why are they given the name B'nai Binah? Now, the simple answer is because that fits the rhyme. I mean, this is a poem. It rhymes. B'nai Binah Yemei Shemona. Binah and Shemona. It's not a complete rhyme, but it's close enough. Binah Shemona. So Memela, you can't ask a kasha, why did a poet use a word that rhymes? He used it because it rhymes. That could be a pshat, and again, it's I know it's not a yeshiva teretz, but again, it's a perfectly legitimate teretz. But the Chasam Sofer wants to say a little deeper. He says, what is the difference between a chacham and a maven? Or what is the difference between chokhmah and binah? So chokhmah is knowledge. I learn a lot of knowledge. I take in a lot of facts. I know how electricity is generated. I know how computers work. I know how cars work. Whatever it is, I just take in many facts. Even in Torah, right? I know the 4 halakim of Shulchan Aruch. I've taken in all of the facts. Binah is a deeper quality in which you're maven davar mitoch davar. You're able to take the facts and apply them to new situations. And you can have a person, for example, let's imagine a person like knows all of Shulchan Aruch. And then someone comes to him with a shaila about can you use an inverter air conditioner on Shabbos? So he might say to you, I know every sif in the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah and Neisei Kalim, and there is not a single mention of inverter air conditioners in it. He says, there's no answer I can give you because it's not there. Now that's kind of crazy, but the problem is you need another quality. The midah of Chachma is not enough. Chachma says, I know everything in the Shulchan Aruch. Binah is the capacity to apply what you know to a different situation. Every paisek, see, people make a mistake when they talk about someone as a paisek. A paisek is not somebody who is simply going to tell you what's in the Mishnah Berurah. You don't need to be a paisek. You need to be a masman. You need to learn it. I'm not knocking how hard it is to know the Mishnah Berurah. But if all I'm telling you is what's in the Mishnah Berurah, at the end of the day, I'm not paskening. I'm just telling you what's there. So what do we mean when we say somebody is a posek? It's primarily the quality of binah, that they're able to take the yesodos of the halacha and apply it to different situations. That's a different capacity. That's not only chokhmah. That's binah. And that's what we mean when we say maven davar mitoch davar. So says the Chasam Sofer beautifully. If I would just be a chacham, I see things, I would have made Chanukah 7 days. There was enough oil for 1 day. A miracle happened that it burnt 8 days. So what I see is, I see a miracle of 7 days. Exactly like the Beis Yosef's kasha. But if I have the quality of binah, I understand from what I see to something that I didn't directly see. So from the 7 days, I understand that even the first day is a miracle. That's why B'nai Binah made Chanukah for 8 days. A Chacham would have made Chanukah for 7 days. Okay. This was a long digression. I just brought it in to illustrate Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa, because then the Gemara goes on and says something else about Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa. That's Nogeya, this shtickle, in the Even Shelaima. And it says that Chanina ben Daisa would be mispala. And at one point he was asked, how do you know if your tefillah is going to be answered or not? Do you know ahead of time? Do you have a chush if the Eibishter is makabel your tefillah? So he said the following. He said, Im tefillasi shagura b'pi. If the words were fluent, I said the words without stumbling, without stuttering, without mispronouncing. Sometimes you get tongue-tied, right? Sometimes, you talk and whatever. Your mind and your mouth are not working at the same speed, and the words don't come out right. So when that happens, he says, to me, that's a siman that my tefillah are not going straight up. But if the tefillah is shagur, the words flow, tefillah say shagura b'piv, that is a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makabel my tefillahs. So based on that, the Gra says, one should try to look over the davening ahead of time so that the words would be shagur b'piv. I'm assuming that the makar is the story of Chanina ben Daisa. But there are a lot of problems with that, because number one, first of all, even in Pashup Shad of the Gemara, that was talking about a time when people didn't have Sidurim, and the Baal Tefillah had to know everything by heart. So Shagura and not Shagura meant I didn't remember the words. L'chara today, that's not really shayach. You have a sitter. In other words, the notion that today my tefillah is not going to be shagor is less shechiach today, simply because we have a sitter. But the other thing is, there's something illogical here. The Gra seems to say that if you make your tefillah shagura, you're going to be answered. The Gemara's point seems to be exactly the opposite point. In other words, it's not like all you have to do to get your tefillah answered is to be sure you say the words smoothly. No, the Gemara says the other way around. If Hashem is not makabel your tefillah, he'll mess you up. In other words, that's not going to be solved by my practicing. See, if you were to assume it's a mechanical thing, be sure your tefillah is shagura, because then it'll be makabel, because if your tefillah is not shagura, it won't be makabel. It's not that shagura or not shagura is the siba, is the reason why Hashem accepts my tefillah. It is the sign from Hashem whether he'll accept it. So if you're not worthy of having your prayers accepted, you're not going to get it accepted because you practiced your pronunciation. What's going to happen is you'll mess it up anyway, or whatever it will be. So to say, in order to give you the promise of Chanina ben Daisa, be sure to practice your prayer to be shgura. I mean, that would imply, to use Lamdasha terminology, that shgura b'piv is a siba rather than a siman, meaning, but that's not the pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara is not saying shgura is the reason Hashem accepts your tefillah. Shgura is the sign that Hashem accepts your tefillah. Why does Hashem accept your tefillah? Because you're roy l'kach. So either I'm roy or I'm not roy. That's not going to change on how much pronunciation practice I put in. So it's a bit of a tzarachian, but it could be maybe my whole assumption is wrong. I'm assuming that the makor of the Gra is the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa, but Lamaisa, it doesn't say that that's the makor. Maybe Stamazah, he's saying, it's covered to Hashem that you should look over your tefillah ahead of time so you'll know what you're saying. Now, you still have a kasha. L'chara, if I have a sitter, why do I need to do that? Now, it may be, if it's an unfamiliar Amidah, maybe that is true. Meaning, if it's Musaf Chalamayid, that many people, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, mess up. You know why? Because you're reading your Archko Siddur, and it says, on the second day of Chalamoed, I get this question all the time. You say so-and-so. Well, second day of Chalamoed in Eretz Yisrael, which is the third day of Yom Tov, or second day of Chalamoed based on Chutz La'aretz, which was the fourth day of Yom Tov, and I'm living here, and let's say I'm a tourist, I still keep Yom Tov Sheni, right? Or I'm a Talmud who keeps Yom Tov Sheni, right? I mean, this is an old problem. I mean, I once sent a suggestion to ArtScroll that they should not use what day of Chalamoed you say something. They should say what day of Sukkot. Don't say on the second day of Chalamoed. Say on the third day of Sukkot you say this. On the fourth day of Sukkot you say this. That wouldn't mess you up at all. You see what I'm saying? Because that tells you what you say on the day of Sukkot. When you say on the day of Chalamoed, That's actually very, very confusing. And the emes is people always come, Shabbos Chol HaMoed, right? Every Yom Tov, somebody comes to me and says, oh, I davened Yom Tov davening and Shabbos Chol HaMoed, right? So it is true that the concept of looking over the tefillah does make sense when you're dealing with unfamiliar Shmoneh Esrei. But to say that every day I got to look over the tefillah should be shagura is a little hard to chop when you have a sitter and the shkur is there right away. By the way, what's the story? Well, Yashav told the story once. We don't, the yetzers, the 4 parshios, Shkalim, Zachar, Para, and Chaydesh. So there are special haisafas to Chazaras Hashatz that we say. They're called yetzres. And in most yeshivas, they don't say them at all. But in Hasidic places, they say it. And in some Ashkenazic Kiddush, not Sfardim don't have it, but these are the yetzers of the Dalit Parshias, and they're in the Article Siddur. The Article Siddur has the yetzers. I remember growing up in a young Israel, we said yetzers. In yeshivas, we don't, for whatever reason, we don't say yetzers. So some of the yetzers are very, very hard. They're hard to understand. They're very hard to translate. They're hard to make sense of. They're alluding to all sorts of midrashim that if you don't know the midrashim, you would never guess in a million years. And there's unfamiliar words that are even hard to pronounce. These are unfamiliar words. So that's something you look at ahead of time. So what's the story with Rabbi Yosef? He says there was a poritz. Poritz is the Polish landowners that Jews used to work for. They're goyim, poritz. So the poritz was like a dictator. He had an estate. The poritz might have a whole city, a whole town. People pay taxes to him. And he would be meshabed the Jews. All the Jews worked for him. They worked on his farms. They worked on his forests, whatever it would be. Called the poritz. There are numerous stories of the relationships of the Jews and the poritz. Some of them are tragic and painful. Some of them are funny. I'll give you an example. They have a story where a poritz, they used to like to make Jews do averos. So he put a gun to his Jewish employee's head. He says, Yassel. He says, Yassel, I have this delicious bottle of wine. Drink this wine or I'll shoot you in the head. So it's yayin nesach, right? It's forbidden to drink the wine. But for steitzach, for pikuach nefesh, you're allowed to drink yayin nesach. So the Jew says, less breira, I don't have breira. He drinks the wine. And the poritz puts the gun back into the holster. He says, that's a good boy. How did you like the wine? So Yassel says, no, the wine was really good. Could you pull out the gun again? give me another pikuach nefesh situation. So those are funny stories. And then we have stories of mamish tragedy where people were murdered and doing mitzvos. They died al kiddush Hashem. But Rabbi Yashiv would tell the story. I don't remember it. I don't remember. It's a funny thing. I remember the story. I don't remember the point. I don't remember what he was trying to say with the story. But I'll tell you the story. The story was that the poritz decided he would paskin who should the Rav of the community be. So a person said to him, how can you decide who the Rav is? You don't know anything. He said, listen, I know this. I know that Yidden daven from a siddur. Jews daven from a siddur. I'll give the siddur to the candidates, and if the person is fluent in reading the siddur, then probably he's the most educated person. So, and the poritz opened the siddur at random. So one guy got Ashrei, and he read it perfectly. The poritz just opened up the siddur, says, here, read. Ashrei, perfect. The other guy got the yetzer for Parshas Zachar, which is the words are hard to pronounce. He says he was stumbling and the like. So the poritz says the first guy gets it. So the one who didn't get the job, who actually was the bigger Talmid Chacham, he went to a gadol and he said, what's the ashras here? What's the ashras? He says, I'm learned, I know the Shulchan Aruch, I know Psak Halacha, and because I didn't read the yetzer for Parshas Zachar, what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, telling me? Why don't get the position? So the gadol told him, well, you're pretty much of a shaita. Since the poritz has no idea what page he's open to, You could have said Ashrei. You could have said Ashrei too. He says, so Iyu diafsid anafshay. You were mafsid yourself. I don't remember the point. Yeshua was trying to make a point with this Maisa. Sometimes you remember the Maisa. I don't remember the Nakuda of the Maisa. But this is what he says. That sometimes, you're your own shaita because you could have gotten out of the situation. Okay. So let's go weiter with Sif Dalet. Sif Dalet, Kamai bi'adam, shekail hagadol mechaverai, yitzrei gadol haimenu. Now this is a Gemara. This is a Gemara in Maseches Sukkah, Nun Beis, Amud Aleph. The greater you are, the stronger is your yetzer hara. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a world of bechira. So if my kayach of taiv is so great, then the kayach that's meishech mitara has to be more powerful. Because if I have an all-powerful kayach of tov and a little weakling of a kayach of ra, at that point there's no bechira, I'm just coasting. So as you get stronger and stronger and stronger in Kedusha, the yetzer hara actually goes up as well. Now, this is a Gemara. The question is, let's ask ourselves, the pashtus, what that means. Let's say a guy, was not religious at all, and the guy was a mushchus. The guy was on drugs. The guy was an alcoholic. The guy raped women. The guy murdered people. So you're telling me, as he becomes more and more of a tzaddik, his yetzer hara is going to be greater, meaning his desire to murder and to rape is going to go up as he becomes more of a tzaddik? That's lo yitachin. We don't assume that most Rosh Hashivas have some desire to go out and kill somebody. So, avada, you have to understand that the yetzer hara gets stronger, but it doesn't necessarily get stronger in the same areas that you previously sinned. The one that's yeshev yesek b'Torah may not have the big yetzer hara to murder or to go on drugs or whatever it would be. But he could have a yetzer hara in a yonim like gaiva, right? And that you can hear. Person becomes very, very great. But the kayach of gaiva could grow and grow and grow. So a person has to work on it. Gaiva, arrogance, not paying attention to people, whatever it will be. In other words, the point I'm just making is, when it says kadol gadol mechaverei, yitzrei gadol mimenu, it doesn't mean the yetzer hara in its lowest degenerate form, but there are higher levels of yetzer hara which can take effect. So anyway, this is what the Gemara says, that when you're gadol mechaverei, yitzrei gadol haimenu, so zak degra kain b'mitzvos u'tefillos. This has a specialized application in mitzvos and in tefillah. What does that mean? Kol davar shu yoser gadol liumaseh hayetzer hara yoser gadol. The more significant is your mitzvah, the more powerful will be the yetzer hara to take you away from the mitzvah. So it's not just as you become greater, your yetzer hara becomes stronger. That's one thing. But it means when your mitzvah is more important, the yetzer hara works double time to get you away from it because it's so precious. They tell him, I've read it, but I think I heard it from my own Rosh Hashiva, Rav Ruderman, Zichrono Livracha, that there was a Bacher in Volozhin, a Talmud of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who was finishing Shas. He was a young boy, 16 years old, and he was mamish, learning Shas Be'iyun, and it was an amazing thing. And one day he gets a letter. Well, all the mail came to the yeshiva. The yeshiva gets a letter that his father died, and he needs to come home immediately to help his mother. And Rav Chaim decided not to show him the letter, not to give him the letter. And what happened was, letters kept on coming, like every week, something worse. Your mother needs you desperately. The store has to be liquidated and sold. we're living bianias, we don't have a house, whatever. Like every 2 days, there was something else. Come, why don't you respond? And Rav Chaim Volozhiner didn't tell the son that his father died, and he received over, a few months, 20, 30 letters, each one more desperate than the other. Finally, the Bocher finished Shas. And it was a great, great simcha in the yeshiva. And when the Bocher finished Shas, Rav Chaim said, what is zechus? I have to tell you some very sad news. Your father was nifter, I don't know the exact times, and I'll make up 6 months ago. And you should know what a zechus your siyum is for his neshama. So the boy said, why didn't you tell me? I wanted to help my mother. He says, this is how much the yetzer hara wanted to stop you from doing what you were doing. What you were doing was so amazing, so important, that the yetzer hara pulled out every stop it could to get you out of it. He killed your father. He made your mother poor. He caused the store to go bankrupt, whatever it would be. Trying to get you away. But the very fact that he was trying so hard to get you away shows how chashuv what you're doing was. Now again, I'm not saying this the halacha l'maisa that any rebbe or rosh yeshiva should do such a thing, but it ties in very much with the Gra's teaching that the greater the mitzvah, the more the kaychais of tuma, the yetzer hara, the satan, because these are interchangeable. See, yetzer hara doesn't only mean, because you might be asking, well, what do you mean yetzer? Yetzer hara is the urge I have to do a sin. Yetzer hara is not that my father dies. So you have to understand we're using this in a very general way, that yetzer hara is connected to satan, is connected to sitra achra, connected to kochos satuma. So yeah, the yetzer hara and all its affiliates, caused the father to die. Malach hamas, right? All of these things, because their job is to get you away from your ruchnius. And the more important the ruchnius, the more they will work hard to get you away. They tell a maisa about a balabas that had a store, and the balabas was a big masmid. He learned every single moment when there wasn't a customer in the store. In fact, it's almost as if he didn't want customers, because that caused him to stop learning. And he became very rich, very successful. He opened up branches. Customers were coming by the hundreds, by the thousands. Tremendous hatzlacha. So he died, and his son was not on the same madrega nebuch. And the son made a kal v'chomer. He said, if my father, who didn't care about his business, was zeichet to such hatzlacha, he says, I'll really put my kaychais in the business. And wow, what do you imagine I can make of it? So he decides, he's not learning it. He's like, everything is the business. And what happens is people stop coming. Right? It's geiznish. Nothing's happening. The money's not coming in. The store goes bankrupt. The branches have to be closed down. So Achar Me'av Yesem Shana, he goes to Gan Eden or whatever, and he says, what's going on? My father didn't care about this business at all. And he was so much liach. And my whole life is about building up my business. And I fail. Logically, it doesn't make sense. I really worked hard on this business. So he has a conversation with the yetzer hara, with the satan says like this. He says, your father was learning every single moment. I had to find a way to get him to stop sometimes. So I gave him a lot of business. That way, he has to stop. He won't be able to. He says, you're not learning anyway. He says, what do I need to give you business? He says, you're mavatal. I'm getting what I want without having to pay for it. I'm not gonna give you customers. So what happens basically is, the more chashuv something is, the more the yetzer hara works. That's why the Sfarim say there's a special yetzer hara Erev Shabbos Kodesh. Maybe for single guys it's a little less. I don't know. I don't remember. But for a married person, Friday is often a tense time. And especially when the mishpacha grows larger, it'll be tense. There's a lot to do. And it's funny, no matter how late Shabbos is, you have the same problem. When Shabbos is 4 o'clock, you're ready at 4. When Shabbos is 8 o'clock, you're still not ready at 5 to 8. Somehow, you were able to do it in the winter at 4, right? That's the famous saying. Work expands to fill the time that you have. You have more, whatever it is. But so often, the Svarim tell us this. Often, Erev Shabbos, sometimes husbands and wives get into fights. There's machlokes. Did you do this? Did you get this? Did you do this? Etc. The kids take their showers or whatever it will be. So the Svarim say, once again, the Kedushas Shabbos is so great. But when there's not Shalom bayis, the Kedusha is not really there. So the yetzer hara wants to be machshel you. So you won't be zeicha to the great Kedusha of Shabbos. So that's why it's brought down. You need a special chizuk. You got a special chizuk, Erev Shabbos, not to get into fights. Right? In fact, the B'derech Drush, the Sefer Chasidus say, that's the meaning, Al Pi Chasidus, Lai suvaru eish b'chol mashvasechem b'yom Shabbos. Don't burn a fire in your house on Shabbos. So B'derech Drush, of course it means a fire, but B'derech Drush, don't allow the fire of machlokes to take away the Kedusha of Shabbos, b'yom Shabbos. One of the most famous Hasidic Rebbes, who was the third generation. Baal Shem Tov is generation number 1. The Mezritcher Maggid is the successor. And then you have all the different Rebbeim, the Balatanya, Rav Levi Yitzchak, etc. They're the third generations when you began to have Rebbes. So among the third generation was Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk. He actually brought Hasidus to Poland. The Rebbe Elimelech. To this day, his yard site is in Adar, like a week after Purim. I don't remember the exact date. And thousands of people from Eretz Yisrael and from other countries go to where he is. It's really a big thing. It's like a mini Uman. It's not Uman. Okay, Uman is unique in numbers. But it's a mini Uman in which you do have tens of thousands of people who come to the Yanayim Elimelech. So the story goes that around 50 or 60 years after his death, there were Talmidim who never knew Rabbi Elimelech. And they wanted to know something about him. And they didn't have anybody to ask, because anybody who knew the Rebbe was not alive. But they heard, there was one woman, an old woman, like 100 years old, who used to work in the kitchen. And when she was younger, she worked for the Rebbe. So maybe she would have some zechrenis that she could say about the Rebbe. So they hunted her down, they tracked her down, and they said, we heard that you had worked in the house of Rebbe Elimelech. She says, yeah, Baruch Hashem, I did. She was not so well even, but they asked her, do you remember anything? She says, I don't remember very much, but all I can tell you is that he always had hundreds and hundreds of Hasidim, and we in the kitchen were working all the time because we had to make meals for everybody. And it was pressure, when you work in a kitchen, even if any of you ever go to a restaurant kitchen, people are screaming at each other all the time because it's very, very, very high pressure. Got to get this out, this out, this out. It's not a good place for menuchas nefesh to work in a restaurant. So she said the kitchen was always, people were screaming at each other, people were yelling at each other, people were saying, do that, do that, do that, do that. But the one thing I remember is, once Shabbos began, even the dogs stopped barking. Apparently there were stray dogs around there. He says, there was like a kayach of Shalom that came into the Adver. Even though Shabbos was a busy time, Shabbos was also maybe Shabbos was a busier time than even during the week. But somehow the Rebbe brought in a certain ruach that there was only Shalom. And she said that, and the Talmidim thanked her. They said, that's a beautiful thing for us to remember, that notion of Shalom, leisuvaru eish, b'chol mashvasechem. So those of you who are married, those of you who are getting married, remember this little thought of the yetzer hara of Erev Shabbos, which often is gairim machlokes. Therefore, the greater the mitzvah, the more the yetzer hara will try to take you away from it. And therefore, now then he brings the Gemara in Brachas, V'zeh she'amru. Now again, this is interesting. These are like throwaway insights. They're not developed fully. Li'aylam yehei adam zohir b'tefillah samincha. It's Gemara in Brachas. A person should be especially careful to daven mincha. Now the Gra is connecting this, though, to a thought, and the connection is not immediately apparent, that the greater the mitzvah, the greater the yetzer hara. So he seems to be suggesting that there's a miyuchadik yetzer hara for mincha that may be greater than shachris and ma'ariv. And the problem basically is, indeed, again, in yeshiva it's not so much nogea, but certainly in the working world, at least in Chutz La'aretz for sure, it is very nogea. And that is, mincha time, you're often stuck. You're in an office, you're in a meeting, shkia is going to be, in 5 minutes, but it's hard to get out. So you might think, okay, I'll stay in the meeting, whatever it is. Because mincha has a very small time frame compared to shachris. Shachris I can do before I go to work. Usually. Sometimes there are problems there too. Ma'ariv I can do when I get home. But mincha is like right in the middle of the day. And there's a lot of things. You're in the middle of something. How do you stop? Whatever it will be. So what the Gra is saying is, precisely because Chazal say, mincha has the greatest kayach of every tefillah. There is such a Chazal. That's why the yetzer hara against mincha is going to be the strongest yetzer hara. Kol gadol mechaveirei, yitzrei gadol haimenu. I remember in the days before cell phones. So I remember being many times in Penn Station in New York, in Manhattan. And around Shkia time, all of the payphones, because people didn't have cell phones, all of the payphones were occupied, either some of them, it's phone booths in those days. I don't know if you've ever seen a phone booth, but there used to be something called phone booths. All of the phone booths were occupied by people who were Orthodox men wearing hats, wearing black hats. In other words, they were davening mincha, but they didn't want to do it publicly, so they were holding the phone to their ear as if they were calling HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, it's a long-distance call from New York, it's not local, and the like. And I remember times that people would knock, people, you're taking too long. They bang on the phone booth, get out, you're taking too long, or whatever it would be. But all the phone booths were taken up by people who were mispalel mincha. No, b'yechidus. Everyone was. I don't think they had 10 phone booths, but whatever it is, they had 6 phone booths. There are 6 people with hats in the phone booth. Now today, maybe today, I think Baruch Hashem, in some ways, we're less embarrassed about stam davening simply because in a way, the Muslims paved the way, because Muslims are not embarrassed. They'll put their rug on wherever it is. They'll do their thing. So Memela, I say, well, hey, they do it. Why can't I do it? So this is called achshir doris. Sometimes a weaker door can actually do things a little better, because I think there's less of a busha. There should never have been a busha, but there's less of a busha in these things. So in Eretz Yisrael, that's not a problem. For States, it's not a problem. But in America, it's still an issue. People don't like to daven publicly. What was it with tefillin? After 9/11, when all of these concerns about terrorists carrying bombs, so there was one person who put on tefillin on the airplane, and they arrested him. They took him off the plane because they thought that tefillin might be like suicide bomb. You're putting a bomb on yourself and the like. So El Al really capitalized on this. El Al ran an advertisement campaign. We are the airline who knows what this is. Okay, but I think all airlines, all U.S. airlines now know what it is. So I wouldn't worry about it so much. Okay, let's do just one more. This is the end of Dalet, the same sif. Kriya Shema tzorech liyos bi'ava, u'tefila tzricha liyos b'yira. Again, a very interesting machshava. We know that there are two ways we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is Yiras Hashem. Now, Yiras Hashem itself has two different components. There is the fear of punishment, which is lower Yira. But Yira also doesn't mean I'm afraid God's going to hurt me. But Yira is awe, reverence, deep respect. That's called Yiras Haromamus. It's a Yira out of God's infinite greatness. Yiras Haromamus. And then we have Avas Hashem. I love Hashem. I feel His closeness. The Avudraham says that's why in every bracha we go from second person to third person. Baruch atah Hashem, shehakol niyah, everything came into existence. Bidvaro. Bidvaro means according to His word. So the bracha is inconsistent. It should have said, Shakol niyah bidvarecha. So why do I go from nochach? Nochach is when you're talking directly to somebody. Nister, concealed, as if he's not there, third person. I go from a you to a he. So the Avudraham says, very beautifully, that when you speak to God as a you, that connotes friendship, intimacy, and closeness. That's a reflection of Avas Hashem. You're my buddy, Hashem. You're my friend. You. When I say He, that connotes that Hashem is beyond me. And that's Yira. Yiras Haromamus. So in every bracha, you have to be kailel, the relationship of Ava and the relationship of Yira. So says the Gra, we have this integration in the relationship between Kriya Shema and Shmona Esrei. The emotion of Kriya Shema is one of Avas Hashem. Indeed, what does Shema say? After Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. So Kriya Shema, I should feel love of Hashem. But then, when I approach Hashem in Shmona Esrei, and I ask for my life, and I beg for all the things that I need, the emotion of Shmona Esrei is the yira of Omed Lifnei Hamelech. Ava and yira. Rav Moshe Feinstein, if you ever saw a picture of Moshe Feinstein davening, well, I don't know, you wouldn't see it in the still picture, really, but Rav Moshe Feinstein didn't shuckle. Rav Moshe Feinstein davened ramrod straight. He would bow down, the 4 times you bow down. The rest of the time, he was absolutely straight. So somebody asked him once, the minhag Yisrael is we move around different ways, like kol atzmaisai, all of my bones, praise Hashem. Shuckling, it's called in Yiddish. Why do you not move? So he said, yeah, I used to move, and that's how I was taught in Cheder. But then he said, one time when I was a Rav in Stalinist Russia, and I was building mikvahs, I was doing all sorts of things that were very, very dangerous. Meiser Nefesh Mamish. I was summoned to the KGB. They weren't called, I think they were called the Czech of them, but the secret police. And when you got summoned to the secret police, you didn't know if you were going to come out alive. What are the choices? They might shoot you right then. They might send you to Siberia for 25 years, in which case you wouldn't survive. Once in a while, they let you go. He said, I had such, what Moshe said, which Baruch Hashem, he managed to survive whatever they were accusing him of. But he said, I was so afraid. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with yira. I then thought to myself, if a basar v'dam I'm so frightened of, that I'm paralyzed, then how can I not have the same midah towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And therefore I realized the appropriate stance of Yiras Hashem is a pachad that you can't even move. Now again, I'm not saying this to halacha. I mean, the minhag of most people is to shakel, and that's the minhag, and you don't have to change it in any way. But still, this is what Rav Moshe said of Yira. So the Gra says that Kriya Shema is Ava, and Shemona Esrei is Yira. And now listen to this. V'zehu inyan. See, these are amazing little things in the middle there. Zehu inyan semichas geula l'tefila l'chaber ava v'yira. Wow, this is a whole new pshat. We know that there is a chiyuv gamor, that you have to connect geula, goal Yisrael, with tefillah. That's why, for example, there's nothing you can say. You don't say amen. When the chazan says, Baruch atah Hashem, goal Yisrael, you don't answer amen, because you don't have a break between geula and tefillah. So what do you do? So that's a machlokas. They're different minhagim. The Ramah says that the chazan says goal Yisrael silently, Baruch atah Hashem. He says goal Yisrael silently, so you don't hear it. Others say you should finish with the chazan, goal Yisrael, so you're finishing at the same time, whatever it is, but this is called smichas geula l'tefila. Now the emes is, the chiyuv of being samech geula l'tefila is not only in Shachris, but it's even in Ma'ariv. And the Gemara asks the kasha, well, wait a second here. In Ma'ariv, I say, Baruch atah Hashem goal Yisrael, but after goal Yisrael, I say, Hashkivenu, and I end with Shomer Amo Yisrael La'at. I'm not even talking about Baruch Hashem Lil, I'm talking about Shomer Amo Yisrael La'at. So l'chayra, I'm being mafsik ben geula l'tefila. So the Gemara says, Hashkivenu is geula arichta dami, because geula is redemption. Hashkivenu talks about God protecting me. That's also geula. And therefore, just like Hashem Sefasai Tiftach is an extension of Teffilah, so it's called Teffilah Arichta, Hashkivenu is Geula Arichta. Of course, the big question you could ask again is okay, I got it. So Hashkivenu is not Mapsik, but what about Chatzi Kaddish? After I say Shamer Moisel La'ad, the Chazan says, Chatzi Kaddish, Gadal v'yis Kadash, or Yiskadel v'yis Kadesh, whatever you say. So you got a problem. Like, why isn't that a hefsek between Geula and Litfila? Okay, well, we'll leave that maybe for another time. But you have to be Saimech Geula Litfila. So here's what the Gra says. This is how he learns. Why do we have to be Saimech Geula Litfila? Because Geula represents Ava, because God redeemed us, that shows his love for us. And Geula is also the after bracha of Shema, which is Ava. Tefillah is Yira. We want to combine, we want to integrate, we want to join together Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. The same way the Avudraham said in the bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem, Neichach and Nistar, it's joining Ava v'Yira. So too, Smichas Geula L'Tefila is gebayit on being mechaber. It's built on being mechaber Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. That's a beautiful word. I mean, that's a chiddush in Havana of understanding this. And then he points out, and you'll see this in some Siddurim, and mainly in Sephardic Siddurim, but apparently the Gra held this was something Ro'i for Ashkenazim as well. Shehu Shilov, Havaya, and Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. Havaya is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Rachamim. And Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, depending on how it's vocalized, it could be Mechuban Keneged the Shem Elokim, which is the Midas Hadin. And if you see the way it is, there are Sidurim that are Meshalev. They combine the Shem Havaya with the Shem Adnos in one word. And the way it works, again, it's actually shown in the Even Shelaima. You have Yud, which is the first letter of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Then you have Aleph. In other words, every other letter. Aleph is the first letter of Adnos. Then you have Hey, which is the second letter. Then you have Dalet. In other words, basically, you're Meshalev, Shem Adnos, with Yud Kei Vav Kei. And if you look, many Sephardic sitters, Badafka, when they write out the Shem Havaya, it'll be this, you don't pronounce it, but they're going to be Meshalev, the two ideas, and that's combining Rachamim and Din, which is Ava and Yira. Okay, so apparently you have an Ashkenazi Raya that Shiluv is the proper thing to do. Okay, we'll stop it. Have a good Shabbos.